This episode was sponsored by Property, the leading real estate agent for all real estate transactions with a comprehensive ecosystem. They combine highly trained experts with the latest technologies on an intelligent platform to provide clients, brokers, and service partners with risk-free, flexible, and simplified services. Learn more at property.com. That's property with an I.com.
You can offer the best self-care tools and free therapy and all of those things. If people work in a context where they have no time for self-care, and it's almost toxic, right? Conflict and so on. And that doesn't only happen in consulting, it happens everywhere, right? Just normal part of work. They won't prioritize self-care to the level they should.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Merle.
I'm very excited for today's episode. I'm sitting here with Vlad, co-founder and CEO of Kyan Health, an AI-powered enterprise solution that connects employee well-being with measurable business impact. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today, Vlad?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a sunny day in Zurich. We're at the beginning of spring, so really excited to have this chat with you today.
Good vibes. So, Vlad, I know you're originally from Romania, but then you decided to do your studies in Switzerland and in France. Do you want to bring us back with you and tell us a little bit about your background and your decision-making also to move into these countries?
Sure. I mean, I was born in 1989 in Romania, and I went to school pretty much until I finished high school in Bucharest. Mm-hmm. And after that, I really wanted to explore, the wide world that was available, and decided to study abroad. I wasn't sure on Switzerland yet, so I had done my SATs, applied for a bunch of schools in the US, but then also realized that Switzerland is just this, amazing academic hub that's very unexplored, or people don't really talk about it, and made a decision to try it out. The challenge was I didn't speak French at all when we moved here. So I remember I decided to move, took away my high school degree and submitted it to Université de Lausanne, and had about 2 weeks to learn French to a B2 level.
Oh my God.
And so those were some exciting 2 weeks. Basically told everybody in my family, friends, that I won't speak any other language than French for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And, studied grammar and everything you needed to go to. And I think I just barely passed at a very, very, close level to B2.
Very impressive.
Well, what made it even more frustrating was I have a twin brother.
Yeah.
And my twin brother had passed his B2 exam in Romania before we moved here. So I had a, very strong incentive to get it through as well so we could study together in Switzerland.
That's a really cool story. What exactly did you study at the end?
Economics and finance in Lausanne. And then in France, I moved and studied international economics and finance as well.
Mm-hmm. And the most significant and I think also largest stretch on your CV is your time at McKinsey, like a total of 9 years, I think. So you got to work all over the world and you started as a business analyst, then moved to engagement manager. And the last position that you held was as global manager for the employee mental health program.
That's correct.
How did you move into that program? What happened? How did you end up creating and also managing such an important initiative?
Yeah, I think as with mental health in general, it's usually rooted in some personal experience. Mm-hmm. And maybe for the majority of my career in McKinsey, I worked on HR-related topics. So think about reorganizations, transformations, a lot of companies that just want to figure out what's the right, shape and size of the organization would typically call McKinsey for those projects. And I really found those to be very interesting problems. And at some point in my career, I also wanted to explore other types of challenges. So I decided to also work on digital business building, a practice within McKinsey that's now called LEAP. And I remember transitioning from, traditional consulting and organizational work into digital business building was a very challenging transition for me. It required a completely different way of thinking. And at the same time, I made the decision to move away from Switzerland and, European-based projects into Singapore. And so there were a lot of different changes in my life happening at the same time. Totally different way of working, different people. And it all became a little bit too much. And I progressively started experiencing symptoms of anxiety and depression throughout 2018 and 19, until one day when I was in Singapore in my apartment, I remember very vividly, I thought I was having a heart attack. I really felt like this, extreme surge of, I don't know how to describe it. I guess now it was clear it was not a heart attack, it was a panic attack. But when you're in it doesn't feel like panic. It feels like something else. You actually don't really have the words. And I was thinking, oh no, this can't happen right now. I need to be in Indonesia for a workshop the next day. I need to sort of get a grip. And I was very lucky. My then fiance, now wife, was there. She helped me through it, helped me come down. I realized at some point it was not, a heart attack, but decided to see a doctor the next day. Canceled my workshop. I can go into that as well in a bit. And when I saw the doctor the next day, they did the whole battery of tests and so on and said, look, clinically it looks okay, but blood pressure is extremely high. Can you talk to me a bit about what's happening in your life? And I remember I really, got completely blocked. I actually started crying at some point and sort of opened up to a lot of difficulties that I was going through. And then decided that I just needed to take a break and, figure things out. And I was very lucky because my mother is a psychiatrist in Switzerland. So I gave her a call and asked, look, these things are happening. It wasn't really stigmatized in any way. Again, my family works in mental health. I just never expected it to happen to me.
Yeah.
So for the first time, I asked her for help on mental health. I said, how can I get any help? How can I find the right person? There's usually about a 6-month wait to speak with a psychotherapist in Switzerland. It's very hard to also find the right therapist, right? Yeah. So every time you have to switch, you get, to the back of the wait list. But because of, her network, I was able to get an appointment in, I think it was 2 or 3 days.
Oh, amazing.
And I credit that person, if not with saving my life, not to be overly dramatic, really dramatically improving it, helping me address some of the big fundamental questions that were holding me back and that were also preventing me to grow and move on with my life and, with the work that I was doing. And I ended up being off work for about 4 weeks. And after that, I sort of had to make a decision because, you go back to work and people want to know where you were gone. And there was 2 options. Option 1 was make up a story. I was gone on holiday, needed some time, or, I took whatever, a sabbatical. There's many, many different stories. But I realized that by telling that story, I would be just nurturing shame, sort of covering it up. And then I guess at some point, you end up believing it. But for me, somehow it didn't feel authentic. So I decided to tell the truth. And what I did, just so I don't tell the same story every time, I recorded a very short video. I think it was about maybe 2.5, 3 minutes, just very factually recounting my experience.
Yeah.
Over the past 6 months, here's how I was feeling. I started experiencing these symptoms. And then, all of a sudden, a few weeks ago, this happened. I thought it was something serious. Turns out it was a panic attack. I realized that I needed to take care of myself. And here's how I made that step. Here's the type of self-care exercises and things I'm doing now. And here's how reality is going now, right? The path to recovery. And my mind was, whenever somebody asks, what did you do for the last 4 weeks? I would just forward them the link. But when I published the video, it's a bit like when you publish something on YouTube, there's a setting and you can put it private or public. And I just, clicked through quickly and it was put on public. I didn't plan for it to be, featured or anything, but it turns out that it became a little bit viral within in the intranet. It was internal, yeah. And I started getting, I think within 2 to 3 weeks, about 100 emails, maybe more, from people at all levels of seniority, from new hires that had just started to managers, senior managers, and even, partners and senior partners. And the topics were very consistent, mostly questions. How did you realize this was happening? How did you decide to act? Is it the end of my career or is it the end of your career? I'm dealing with exactly the same things. Do you have time for me to have a 1 hour discussion? And I did about, I think, 30 or 40 1 hour calls with people who had reached out to me. that's also when I realized I'm not meant to be a therapist or a coach. I don't really have the patience for that. And also, I think it requires a very high level of empathy, which I don't think I have. But, like a good consultant, I decided to try to synthesize some of the themes that I was hearing, right? So I created a very short document that just said, hey, here's what's going on. Here's the main themes that we're hearing. Here's why, despite having some very basic support resources in place, people are not using them or are not aware. And here's what I think we should do. And this was, I think, October or November 2019. So before the first wave of the pandemic. And I shared it with a couple of people, and then nothing happened. And I kept on, going with my work. And then at some point, March 2020, first wave of the pandemic comes in. And all of a sudden, mental health is on everyone's mind. Because you compound, the normal effects of pressure at work with the challenges that people had being locked down. Right? And that's when McKinsey decided to really become more proactive and create a proactive mental health program and asked me to essentially lead that. So long-winded answer, that's how I shifted focus from, I was a senior EM engagement manager at the time, to managing the mental health program. It was very honestly also the thing that I could get really motivated and engaged with a lot more than, the traditional consulting work after that experience. And for the next year and a half, 2 years, I really focused on helping people prevent mental health crisis rather than only acting when they're already there. Right? So a lot of that work was with individuals, learning about the resources that are in place, selecting new resources. We brought in meditation tools within McKinsey, but it was also around looking at the data and figuring out what's going on in the environment where they work. That's really, challenging. Happy to talk more about that, but you ask a provocative question, so I give you a long answer.
You said something at the beginning that's still in my mind. You said, I never thought it would happen to me. When you talk to other people within your company, and I guess also since you founded Kyan Health and you have more data as well, do you think this is something that, I don't know if it makes people more prone, but like a notion that you see a lot, that people are not educated enough, maybe also about the topic to realize it can happen to anyone, especially we live in a very fast-paced world. And it would never happen to me because I come from a healthy family. I have wonderful friends. I'm in a good relationship. I have a good work life. And then suddenly it happens. Is that something that you see quite often?
All the time. It is a very stigmatized topic. And that's why we don't know when it happens to most people. And there's this myth that people who struggle with mental health at any point in their life, which is, about 50% of the population throughout the entire lifetime, right? I'll come back to this point, but most of the time you don't hear the stories, but the statistics are there, right? And there's a very high correlation with highly engaged, highly performing individuals in the workplace who also struggle with their mental health. And there's this study that was done that I found so interesting around presidential mental health. So there was a university in the US, I think it was Yale, which looked at the first 200 years of US history and analyzed the correspondence of the first presidents and then cross-referenced it versus the clinical standards in ICD-11, right? And tried to say, purely based on their letters to their families, their letters to their staff, their journaling, could we diagnose this person with any mental health condition? And it turns out that 1 in 2 US presidents suffered from a clinical mental illness, and 1 in 4 while in office. Despite that, they were able to hold what was the highest office in the world, right? The most powerful office in the world, even then, lead America through wars, and all of those host of things. And I think that's just an example of the cost of, authority and the challenges that it sometimes brings. But despite those challenges, people can be extremely successful and can, learn to cope and deal. And if they have support, actually, grow on the other side and be very effective and very, achieve a lot in their lives.
Yeah, I think it's a lot also about, like you said, the stigma and getting rid of that stigma also, that once you had it, it will always be there with you. I mean, yes, it will be there because it influences you and how you from there on make decisions. But it, like you said, doesn't make you less valuable in the job that you do or in the impact that you have, I think.
Actually, some of the best leaders I've met and athletes are totally transparent about their struggles. Mm-hmm. And, an athlete knows this better than anyone. In order to grow and push your limits, there's some element of suffering there. There's some element of, going through the hard stuff that you don't want to deal with. That's kind of how muscle is built. Mm. And I think there's an element of that when it comes to our mental health as well, right? By going through these challenges, you also get to know yourself a lot better. Yeah. And that also helps you be more empathetic and ultimately also a better leader, I think. Now, there's, a caveat to that. There's clinical mental illness that, people have to get medication for. Yep. and clinical treatment. But even those, right, 90% of the time when people act, there's symptom reduction, symptom improvement. Mm-hmm. The biggest challenge is that people don't act. Yep. And they wait far too long before taking measures. And that's part of the things we're trying to solve.
Talking about things that you want to solve. Let's go back to Kyan Health. And I can really feel that this topic is something you're very passionate about. What about your co-founders? How did you meet and how did you also bond over this topic?
Yeah. So there's three of us. Mm-hmm. Konstantin has a very similar background to mine. Mm-hmm. He is not Romanian, he's German, but he also studied economics. He also went to McKinsey for a long time. And he was a junior partner based in the Zurich office, responsible for the organizational health work that McKinsey does. So maybe in simple terms, my role was more around individual health and resilience. Mm-hmm. His role was on organizational health and resilience. So the context where people work. And those became our two pillars at Kyan. Mm-hmm. And we think you need to do both of these things very well so you can improve health and well-being in a company. We'll come back to that. And at the time, a loved one in his family had struggled a lot with their mental health. And he reached out saying, hey, how can I get support? What is available? He had, already seen that in the Swiss healthcare system, it takes a very long time to find the right therapist. So he was looking for guidance. Mm. And I, spent some time with him explaining what was available. And we kind of both agreed that it's not ideal. There's still a lot of, difficulty finding care. And this was in a world in 2020 where you would have, 5-minute delivery of, any type of food at home, right? So on one hand, you get this extreme high convenience for some of these things that arguably aren't that important, right? And on the other, when somebody you really care and love is struggling, there's not much you can do to help them.
Yeah.
So we both were very driven by the same topic and decided that it would be a great partnership to start building a company together. And about a month into this, I think less than a month, we did decide there needs to be a product. There needs to be a technical element that will help us scale and bring our vision and our solution to millions of people. But we were two former McKinsey consultants who can't write a line of code, and this is pre-AI, pre-no-code solutions, right? So we decided to find an MVP factory. Mm-hmm. For your audience who doesn't know what this is, it's the type of agency that can build your first version of a product cheaply and just so you can validate your hypothesis. But the challenges were we weren't even technical enough to know, what is a good agency from a great agency. Mm-hmm. And I think we had about maybe 5 or 6 of those calls together with Konstantin in my house at the time. And we ended up feeling very frustrated after all of those calls. And at some point, my wife, who was in a different room, remember, this was the pandemic, so everything happened in-house, comes and says, hey, I know somebody who might be able to help you ask the right questions. And if not pick the best agency, at least challenge them to, a way that allows you to decide who's good and who's bad. And so we invited Ignacio, who had gone to school with my wife and turns out also with Konstantin, but they didn't know each other. And he joined 3 meetings with different agencies. Mm. And at the end of the 3rd meeting, he had heard us pitch Kyan and our vision about, 3 times. He said, look, guys, I don't think you can achieve your vision of building a tech mental health company, a digital mental health company, by outsourcing tech, And I think you should have an internal tech team, and I'd be happy to lead that team for you. Turns out he was also transitioning away from the second company he sold. Mm-hmm. And we said, yeah, of course. I mean, if you're free to join us, we'd love to have you start on this vision. Yep. He was living in Berlin at the time, so that's also why we opened up also a Berlin office very soon after we founded the company. So that's the story of the three of us, and happy to answer more questions.
And you just said you had this one pillar of like individual health and then the context, and these were also the pillars that you wanted to build at Kyan Health. What was the difference, maybe also in terms of tools that you had at McKinsey building up the programs and what you and your co-founders later built?
Yeah. So we didn't have a lot at McKinsey on this topic. It was less about the tools and more about what doesn't work, which helped us shape the vision for Kyan. And I'll give you a very practical example. We had about 35,000 employees. We launched Headspace for all of them. Headspace is the meditation app. And within about 3 weeks, we had somewhere close to 15,000 downloads, maybe 12,000. So we celebrated, like, a third of the company is now meditating. Great, we'll get super focused, present people who manage their well-being really well. Obviously, that wasn't the case, and retention really dropped very quickly, right? We saw that people downloaded the app, maybe meditated for 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and then dropped it and went back to their day-to-day. And the same with an employee assistance program that only offered therapy, right? So the insight was that you can offer the best, self-care tools and, free therapy and all of those things. If people work in a context where they have no time for self-care, and it's almost toxic, right? Conflict and so on. And that doesn't only happen in consulting. It happens everywhere, right? It's just a normal part of work. They won't prioritize self-care to the level they should.
Yep.
Right? And a lot of those things that happen in terms of conflict, in terms of workload, are actually hidden. And most organizations figure those out when people leave in exit interviews, or they figure it out when people go on sickness or disability leave, right? Mental health reasons are now the number one driver for long-term disability leave in most European countries. And so for us, when we founded Kyan, it was really clear that we wanted to do 2 things well. We still need to support individual resilience because it is an individual responsibility to manage our mental health. The company is not responsible for the individual mental health, but the company is responsible for the environment they create. Right? And when you look at the environment, what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. As long as you can brush it under the rug, it will get brushed under the rug. And so we decided to create tools that allow companies to measure in real time the quality of the work environment while providing individual health and resilience tools for individuals, hopefully freeing up more time to work on those topics over time. Right?
Is that because I know you say that Kyan Health offers a holistic approach? Is that part of this holistic approach, or what exactly do you define under this umbrella?
So I think there's two perspectives. At the individual level, we already need a holistic approach because mental health is health. It's not a separate organ, right? Or you could argue it's the brain, but it's very closely linked with everything else, right? Physical exercise has a direct impact on your mood through endorphins, right? Your nutrition has an impact on your mood, sleep as well. So just focusing on the mental health dimension, symptoms, the negative self-talk that we all have and so on is not enough. So what we mean by holistic is also looking at physical elements, the quality of your sleep, for example. Do you move? Or do you just stay at the desk and keep working and don't take breaks, right? The quality of your social relationships. Do you have a support system? Do you have friends at work? That turns out is one of the number one predictors of satisfaction at work. Do you just have friends at work? Is there a person you want to go and tell about your day, right? So all of those things at the individual really matter. And so we go beyond just the pure, mental health symptom checker questions, and we try to get a holistic perspective of the individual's environment. And that also means when you're using our tools, you don't just get, exercises for your mood, but you might also get nudges for figuring out how do you improve your sleep routine, for example. That's one example. But then there's a second perspective, which is the environment. The environment where people, show up to work every day, right? Is it a threatening environment? Do you feel unsafe psychologically, right? Is it, just unmanageable workload? All of those things you can't fix at the individual, but as a company, once you have enough data, you can fix. And there's a very strong incentive to fix them because absenteeism is very costly for large organizations, and so is turnover, right?
Yeah.
When you lose your best people and all of a sudden you have, a highly performing team without a manager, you care.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why these are the two perspectives that we try to bring together at Kyan.
And is it connected to like smartwatches, or because sleep tracking and all that stuff? How do you do that?
That's a very good question. And we often get this question. So a lot of the data comes from self-reported interactions with our AI. So you would have a discussion with Kai, and Kai would ask you, how did you sleep last night? Not so good, right? You can also fill those questions out directly by just, moving a few scales. It takes less than 30 seconds. And we looked at passive tracking as well. I'm a big fan of
wearing two watches.
But turns out, well, a Whoop and a watch. But turns out that only about 18% of the active population is wearing wearables. But it's growing very fast, about 6%, 7% every year.
Okay.
But for us, it just wasn't a meaningful enough penetration to get enough data that's statistically significant for our clients when we scale it up. So we actually built the tech tools to integrate data from Oura Ring, from Whoop, from Apple Watch, but we didn't release the model yet because not enough people use them so that we can, get enough data from that. And still the best quality data comes from some self-reported indicators.
How do you make sure though that the answers are valid? Because you just said, do I feel psychologically safe in my environment? How do you make sure people would answer honestly if they don't feel safe where they work? Yeah,
very interesting question. I'll try to keep it short, but we look so much into how do you create trust? The biggest issue with workplace-sponsored mental health tools is trust. And there's a good reason for that. If my employer pays for my therapy tool, I could be concerned that they will interpret the data as, this person needs therapy, then there must be, struggling and so on. Very cynical perspective, but, people have it.
Yeah.
So we tried in the beginning everything, communicating that the employer doesn't have access to the data, sharing that it's GDPR compliant, allowing users to give consent. Nothing worked. Turns out the only thing that works is, and the only way to really guarantee trust is if users know they can't be identified. You don't tell them you can't be identified. They just know they can. And the way you do that is by removing any identification, any real identification. So when users create an account with Kyan, they don't need to use their corporate email address. They can use, their personal, but because personal usually has the classic syntax name.surname@gmail.com, we even allow them to create any new email address, and it just has to be validated. It needs to, people need to receive emails on that. It can't be a fake email, right? And secondly, there's an invitation code that is the same for everybody for one client, right? And we refresh that invitation code regularly so we prevent abuse, right? And that was our sort of aha moment where we realized we might not get perfect information that's linked to their HRIS systems where we can put the individual in the perfect department, but we don't need that. What we need is the individuals to actually use these tools. And then turns out that when we build trust at that level, we can actually ask them, which department do you belong to? Finance, HR, and so on. Which country are you in? Switzerland, Germany, and so on. And the intersection between the department and the location is the granularity we need to make inferences at the organizational level. So all of a sudden we have high engagement because of high trust and granular enough information to make decisions about the environment. That was for us, figuring out how do you crack the engagement problem in organizations.
This episode was co-produced with Innovo, the innovation and investment promotion agency for the canton of Vaud. Check out www.innovo.ch/en to learn more.
And do you even go to the level where you give diagnosis? I presume that there are certain questions that you can ask to understand if somebody's more or less prone to, let's say, a burnout. Would you? Well, can you even?
You can. And it's a very interesting question. The challenge with the word diagnose means it's scanning symptoms for an illness. Right? For lack of health. And what we do is frame it in the positive. So instead of using traditional symptom checking tools like PHQ-9 for depression or GAD-7 for anxiety, we would use the WHO-5 survey, which is asking you about the quality of your well-being instead of the likelihood of your disease. So basically, did you wake up feeling refreshed this morning? Versus did you wake up feeling exhausted this morning, right? And just by framing that question into the positive, people feel like they can engage with it regularly. They're not looking for the things that are going wrong. They're evaluating the quality of their life, right? So a lot more people are open to engaging with that type of language versus, just looking for indications of disease. Right? And I think this is part of a broader trend in this ecosystem, which is moving from sick care, from the way healthcare was done originally by treating disease, to actual healthcare, like caring for healthy people, right? Keeping people healthy. So that's our way of addressing this. And I will say just one more thing. Even though we are a subclinical tool, so we try to keep people healthy, we do have a way to refer people into the healthcare sector.
Okay.
And then we also use symptom checkers when people have a clinical need, right?
Yeah.
So we keep people healthy, but when they're struggling, we give them the right clinical care that they need.
And I presume so you have these surveys and there, I presume, on a scale, so you can also measure them, you can put them into numbers.
Yep.
How do you then, because mental health and emotions usually very intangible, how do you make it tangible so that the companies that you work with can see also the positive influence that it has on the overall well-being?
Yeah. So turns out that they are measurable, especially the relative difference between certain states of mind. So you and I could have a very different definition of what satisfaction means. But irrespective of the definition, an increase of 1 point in our satisfaction is equally meaningful for both of us. We might have a different starting point, but we both will feel happier when something happens in our life. And it's about figuring out the right? The delta. And what we use is a set of questions that was created by the Oxford Wellbeing Research Center and has been distributed in the largest well-being study ever run by the job portal Indeed, right? And so these are publicly available questions that more than 25 million people have taken and that are already indexed by companies. So any large company can go on Indeed.com and check their well-being profile. And their employees will rate the company on those things. And they rate happiness, purpose, satisfaction, the levels of chronic stress, and many, many, many other questions, right? But usually on Indeed.com, you have maybe 100 people, 50 people who rate those questions. With Kyan, we have, 1,000 people for a company that has 5,000 people, right? 10,000 people for a company that has 40,000 people who routinely rate those same questions. So it gives the company the ability to benchmark themselves versus their public profile, but at a lot more precise level because they have, more data. And it also gives them the ability to benchmark versus general population. So all the other companies in the world who have completed the survey have a rating, right? So we can, very clearly state for every one of our clients if they're above average, below average, and then what are the specific things they need to do to improve, right? So that becomes a pretty meaningful source of insight for these large companies who, again, only use anecdotes, right, in the beginning to figure these things out. Now, all of a sudden, they switch on the light. They know what's going on in pretty much real time.
Do you see difference in your customers in each of the markets, either as maybe even like regional, but also industry-wise?
So first, we see a lot of differences in our clients, even within the same markets. And I think what all of our clients have in common is that they don't just want to check the box solution that they can throw on their careers website and, do a bit of well-being washing. They actually really care. They care about having a healthy organizational culture that allows them to perform at their best, right? They see it as a competitive advantage. It's not just some values we have to put on a website. We really want a culture that, over delivers because we care. And, when our people are healthy, they also perform at their best. That's the philosophy, right? We're not the cheapest provider in the market. There's companies that charge maybe way less than we do, but their goal is for nobody to use them, right? And so when you work with Kyan, your goal is for most people to use them. And as a result, we're a bit more expensive. So that's the first big difference. It's companies who care and who want to address this topic head on. They don't want to avoid the discussion. Then within our portfolio of clients, there's huge differences as well across markets as well. So there's some countries like Switzerland and Germany to a lesser extent where despite all the efforts and the conversations we're having even today, it's a very stigmatized topic. So, Swiss culture is also a little bit closed off when it comes to these things, right? And therefore, even announcing these programs, takes like 30 rounds of reading the email and changing a few words and figuring out how can we say well-being without saying health, right? Or how can we say, health without implying illness? All of those very, challenging topics. So the adoption of this type of tools in Switzerland and Germany is a little bit lower than in the US or in the UK, where this conversation has been normalized over the past, 20 years. In the UK, you have the royal family taking a very strong stance on mental health, right? You have Prince Harry who comes up publicly with his struggles. And those things really help to drive the conversation forward.
Did you ever have a situation where you were talking to a potential customer and you noticed, I actually don't want to implement my product with your company?
We did.
Yeah?
Yeah, we did. We had a very maybe sobering reaction from one of our first prospective clients when we showed them the data that they would get access to. And they asked, well, wouldn't knowing but not being able to do anything about it actually put me on notice? Like, wouldn't this actually create a risk for me? And we were quite surprised. I mean, wouldn't you want to know if something's going wrong in your organization and then find a way to fix it? And that's when we realized that type of company, and it was a very specific type of company, isn't the right client for us. Right? I mean, if you prefer to, be ignorant about a big problem that's affecting your population, then, obviously there's no interest in working with us, right? So we also became much better at identifying our ideal customer persona, excluding some type of companies that, don't really care, but just say they care about these topics, and focusing on the ones who actually do and who see this as a competitive advantage.
What exactly is your business model?
So we work a little bit like an insurance. We price per employee per month or per year in some cases. And everybody in the company has access to all of our tools. So that includes the self-assessments. We don't call them diagnosis, but it's, well-being assessments that give you a very detailed individual profile. Personalized digital care programs. We use AI a lot to really guide you through the different care options and, also sort of create a little bit of sense of ease around talking with another person about these personal topics. And then we have a global network of therapists. And within each employee technically has access to a number of sessions with live therapists, and then there's unlimited conversations with the AI. And then the company gets access to all of the data and people analytics as well. Yeah, that's basically our model.
And is it only for companies or can people individually also?
For now, we only do companies. We've gotten the request a few times. We make a few exceptions, so we definitely can create a demo account so you can try it out. But we made the decision to focus on B2B because we realized the environment is a very strong part of how we experience work life, right? It's not just about individual experience. It's also about the environmental experience. And you really need to influence both to improve mental health. And if you only sell direct to individuals, you lose all of the ability to influence the environment.
That's a good point. And you've recently raised, I think, over 16 million after a previous 4 million seed round already.
The 16 includes the 4. So we just didn't announce the previous one. The latest one was 12.7, and before that we had 4.
So a total of 16.7 then. So this brings you a lot of funding at the moment. Can you tell us a bit, like, how did your fundraising process look like? Did you look within the DACH region, Europe? Did you go outside of Europe also to raise?
Yeah. So already when we raised the 4, we made the decision to redomicile from Europe to the US. So we have a Swiss entity, which is our main commercial entity, and a lot of the IP is in Switzerland. Then we have also an R&D entity in Germany where we build a lot of the code. And we had a holding company in Ireland. And then we moved the holding company into the US in Delaware, which opened up access to a lot more American investors. And when we went out for a Series A round, we already had a very strong raison d'être in Europe and Switzerland. So we very much fit the bill for a Swiss DNA company because 2 founders out of 3 are based in Switzerland. A lot of our clients have headquarters in Switzerland. But we could also excite US investors who do have a fiscal incentive to invest in US headquartered companies and so on. So that's how we ended up going. And then we have a portfolio of investors already of European, Swiss, and American, right? Which I think also helped us a lot during a relatively dry fundraising season to attract investors who really care about this topic.
Yeah. But your team is located in Switzerland and Berlin only, or do you also have a team in the US?
Not yet. We don't have a US team yet.
Yeah. So that's something for the future then.
For the future.
Exciting. And I know that also besides the investments, you also have other supporters and have also been part of the SEF.Growth program, where you've actually got awarded with a high potential label. So congrats. Which is quite an achievement. Can you tell us a bit about how you actually came across this program and what motivated you to apply?
Yeah, sure. So I heard about it from another founder who said that they had gone through the process and also found it very well organized and robust, and it was actually a bit of a good exercise to align the company on what are the things that matter, clarifying some strategic elements as well. And I personally also found the process to be helpful. So I was very happy to go through it. There's also a financial element involved, because by becoming a SEF high potential company, you get access to better terms on debt or a credit line with UBS. And even though we haven't used it yet because we have a lot of cash in the bank after the round, it's always a opportunity to use that and use those funds to grow even faster. So it was just a no-brainer. And I also think that SEF, and we're also working hopefully on the award at some point, is, if not at least one of the best business events in Europe, in Switzerland. So all the big companies in Switzerland who we want to be in front of would be participating in the SEF programs, right? So for us, we don't do a lot of business competitions. We don't attend a lot of startup fairs. In many ways, sometimes they don't really bring a lot of value to startups. But this one did, and we're very happy to be part of the program.
Can you tell us a bit more about this strategic assessment that you were just mentioning? Because I think it's really interesting that you go through a program, and within that, you sort of also learn and maybe get help to move forward with the business, but also as a person and as a leader. What was that like?
It was very helpful. I mean, it starts off with completing a very extensive assessment. So just those questions, the fact that you have very limited amount of space to formulate crisp, concise answers to strategic questions, sometimes tough, requires a lot of thinking. And by thinking about those positioning problems, budget planning and so on, you actually solve problems. Right? So just addressing those, dedicating the time and space and, thinking into going through that process, you're improving the company. Right? And then the second thing that I found most helpful, the jury who assesses those applications is actually very competent and will ask the right questions or follow-up questions to those. At the end of the process, you get a very thoughtful report, right? Ranked on every question and every dimension and with specific insights on what you can do to improve, right? So for us, I mean, I'll show off a bit. It was a very good report. The results were very good, but there was one area that we could improve, right? Specifically about, budgeting and sort of cash planning and all of those things. So it was a really clear takeaway on things we could do and work on. We hired a director of finance. We have somebody looking into this right now. So overall, it was definitely a valuable process to go through. And the outcome itself was also valuable. So happy we did it.
Oh, this is super helpful, I think, especially now that you made decisions on how to improve these problems. And now you have this label, and I guess we'll see you in June at the SEF itself then. What else is happening next? What are the immediate next steps on the journey of Kyan Health?
So one important thing to state, I think we were able to raise a successful Series A not because of what we're doing. As a smart Series A investor, you're not investing in the ARR, the cash flow that the company's doing now. Most Series A companies aren't, making any positive cash flows. We have very high quality clients, significant ARR and growing really quickly. But what excited investors was our vision, where we're taking this company, where we're taking the space actually. And maybe take a bit of a step back. What's limiting growth in well-being globally is the fact that a lot of organizations don't trust the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell a company well-being is good for business, they'll be like, maybe, let's shrug it off. Show me the ROI. And all of these ROI calculations are based on a ton of different assumptions and hypotheses. And, people just get lost in those and don't really fully believe the impact. So we said, well, if there's a consistent, reliable way to show ROI and not just, historically, but also predict risks and, the impact of well-being, then we would solve the biggest issue that is top of mind for companies when they think about this topic, right? And it becomes something really measurable, something companies can put into their financial reports, into their corporate social responsibility reports, right? But it has to be done right. So we're building the world's first predictive care model that's taking our well-being data and contextualizing it with data from the company's systems, which typically tends to be quite siloed, isolated. So we're linking how people feel and perform at work with where they are in the organization from the HRIS. We're linking it with global news that may impact the organization, right? We're linking it with performance data if the data is available in a clean way, right? We're putting all of this into our data engine, and then we're coming out with reliable assessments on risk of absenteeism, people going sick, risk of presenteeism, people coming to work but just not being as productive as they could or should be, and then voluntary attrition due to mental health reasons or other reasons, people leaving the company. And that's exciting because, again, what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. But the flip side is also true. What gets measured reliably does get managed and does get managed very well. And companies have been doing this for decades now for their CapEx, for their tools and machines. They just haven't been doing it for people. And I think if I hear one more time, people are our most valuable resource, that won't be surprising. So it's time that we have a good way to measure how our people are doing and, then apply it reliably across companies. Yeah. So that's where we're taking Kyan. That's what I'm personally really excited about.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Sounds like a really great solution. And what's next for you personally?
I think I'm in it for a long time. And I hope that most founders would say that. But I think particularly because it's rooted in my own personal experience with this topic, right now I would have a very hard time getting equally passionate about a different company or startup. So my real focus right now is growing Kyan into the European leader, then hopefully the global leader in this space. I think we have a real opportunity there. And I also personally have 2 small girls. I want to also spend time with them. So I'm balancing or integrating those 2 things at the same time now.
Yeah. And before we go into our last rapid fire question round, is there anything that you want to give to our listeners in terms of, I don't know, gadgets or resources or tools that you want to recommend or that they should really listen to or really read? Anything that you can recommend?
I really do think that if somebody has never tried mindfulness meditation and just figuring out that rhythm, figuring out how to slow the thinking down in this sort of monkey mind to a place where they can hear what's really going on and address that, then you just live life on the surface, right? And it's really hard to figure out your next step. I won't recommend any specific meditation tool or app, but I really do think we need to go back to understanding the value of slowing down and listening deeply to our inner voice. And I think meditation is the way I personally found to be most effective. There's very good tools out there. Some of them are free. Actually, we'll mention one, Insight Timer, right? Yep. You can go on Insight Timer and listen to some of the world's greatest meditators for free. So if you're struggling with figuring out your next step or even entertaining the idea of launching a startup and trying to figure out what should I be, which startup should I work on, what are the best, ways to learn, how can I tap into my existing experience to figure out my next step. I think meditating on those thoughts for a few weeks can be life-changing. So I think that's one recommendation I would give people. It definitely helped me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Together with Talent Cake, Swisspreneur just released its 5th masterclass. This time on how to create the ideal team framework with your co-founders to ensure future success. It's based on Talent Cake's founders agreement. We've got Talent Cake's CEO Viviana Groppengiese Yokoi co-founder Melanie Gabriel and Scandit co-founder Christoph Roduner, giving you their first-hand experience on how to align the goals of everyone in your team, how to split roles and responsibilities, and why equity, vesting, and investment are topics you need to discuss from day one. It's an intense team-forming bootcamp, and it's available for free on our website. Click the link in the show notes to start watching it now.
And now I want to just ask you some questions and just say the first thing that pops into your head. How do you make sure personally now to avoid overload during your day-to-day?
I don't. I still get overloaded. I'm sorry to say, in many ways, it's hard to avoid it completely.
Yes.
But I also learned when it's too much overload, right? When it's really, when I'm getting close to where I was then, right? And I think that's the moment for me to step back and figure out ways to manage that. Everybody at Kyan has access to Kyan. So, I use meditation regularly. I have my own well-being routine. I have a coach. So those things keep me healthy and sane and productive. But there are moments like there were during our fundraising where, things almost didn't close or didn't go as expected, when I was very stressed. And I think any founder, or business person should expect that life isn't linear. You will have those peak moments, and it's about how you deal with them that really matters.
That definitely answers my other question. Do you use the app yourself?
I do.
So I guess you do. In 2 words, what did working at McKinsey for 9 years teach you?
Use data.
Good answer. And again, 2 words, what has building your company taught you in these 5 years?
Keep going.
Good words to finish. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story, Vlad. And I'm super excited to see where you're going with this.
Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.